Welcome to the final meeting today and the final meeting of the Marxism online event. We're just going to get started just now. Welcome to the closing rally of Marxism 21 online event. No going back, fighting for socialism in an age of catastrophe. It's been a fantastic weekend of talks, discussions and ideas, and hopefully everyone's really enjoyed it. I know I have, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from the brilliant platform of speakers that we have lined up for today. So first off, my name's Lorna, and I'm going to be chairing this meeting. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers Party in Glasgow. And we have a host of absolutely incredible speakers joining us today for our closing rally, who I'll introduce in turn. I'll introduce them as we get to them. So without further ado, with all that said, thanks to everyone for joining. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Karen Reissmann. Many of you will have heard of Karen before. She's a nurse from Manchester. She was fined £10,000 for organising a protest against the 1% pay cut. She's a prominent campaigner and a Socialist Workers Party activist from Manchester. So warm welcome to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who's offered solidarity and support to me over the last few months. It's been quite amazing. One of the things I wanted to start with is actually pre-pandemic, that we forget just how awful Britain was before the pandemic started. That sort of, that the cuts, the privatisation, the austerity that we'd had devastated ordinary working class people's life with a massive reduction in their living standards and their livelihoods. There was a report from the Health Service Journal that predicted there'd been 120 unnecessary deaths as a direct cause of austerity, and that number was going up and up. And in some areas, life expectancy for the first time ever in Britain had started to either plateau or, in some cases, the poorer areas, actually to go down. And that's the shocking position that we were in when we started the pandemic. And what the Tories have done since has been absolutely to devastate things even worse for people. And the barbarity that we've seen of pictures in our television screens of Britain that mirror sort of, what's going on around the world, where we've taken one of the biggest hits in terms of deaths and one of the biggest hits in terms of our own living standards. And what the sad thing is that Labour, that was supposed to be, and they call themselves the opposition, have not actually opposed most of what this government have done in the last 18 months, but have actually supported it or said nothing, stood by. And I think that clearly Starmer was elected in order to defeat the left. He promised that it would make him electable, and it seems like he doesn't even care that it didn't make him electable this time. And I think that I don't take any pleasure in Labour's defeat. I think it's going to make it worse for ordinary working class people, because I think the Tories are going to feel even more confident about their ability to attack us and to carry on. And sadly, I think that the trade union leaders, with some notable exceptions who've been very good, but the vast majority of them have led Starmer and not led any real resistance to what's happened either. So we have the biggest attacks that we've seen in working class history, and we have virtually no official opposition. And I think for us, that means that we have no choice but to fight back. And I think the first thing we have to say is that wherever anybody is fighting back, we always have to offer solidarity to them, whether that's people on strike, whether that's people protesting about racism, about sexual violence, about trans rights. Wherever people are resisting, we have an absolute responsibility to organise solidarity for them, not just because that maintains and supports the people who are fighting back, but actually if you raise a strike of somebody else at work, it gives I suppose the knowledge that it is possible to fight back and it is possible to win. And when people win, they feel like they've been part of it because they've contributed to those struggles. When you raise anti-racism fights at work, it raises the whole question of anti-racism and makes it easier for people to think that they can oppose anti-racism and they'll be supported where they are, and that the possibilities. Second thing I think we need to do, crucially is we have to organise protests and support protests wherever we can ourselves. Where would we be in the last year if we hadn't organised protests? Health workers, some of whom were using bin bags as PPE at the beginning of the pandemic, and yet somehow our union thought just writing us letters about what we needed to do in order to negotiate with managers was sufficient. And I think the fact that people did go out and protest, hard as that was during the first lockdown, actually helped to mobilise some of the health workers later when it came to the health service overpay last summer when they offered us 0%, and this year when they've offered us 1%. And I do think that when our trade union leaders and the Tories somehow imply that we're lucky to have jobs and maybe the fight over pay isn't the key fight, I just think they're posing the wrong alternative, right? They've wasted £37 billion on a privatised test, track and trace that doesn't work, and had they used that money for a health service pay rise, they could have paid us all 15% for 25 years. So I mean, that would have kept me happy for quite a long time, but they haven't chosen to. So it isn't because there's lack of money, it's because of the choices that our government make time and time again to put money in the pockets of their friends, to prioritise profits and never to prioritise ordinary people's lives. And if your job isn't needed anymore, there are plenty of jobs that are needed, both in the health service, climate jobs, services. There are loads of things that we actually need that don't make money, and that's what we should be doing, rather than the things that do make money often that we don't need. And the priorities of our government and our capitalist system are completely outrageous. But where would we have been without the Black Lives Matter protests? The disproportionate deaths that we've seen of COVID, where they did a report that said that was true, 93% of doctors who died in COVID were Black or Asian. And you just think, and what's their answer to it? Their answer is, well, we've done the report and institutional racism doesn't exist and we don't even want to do a report. I just think that the explosion that took place when George Floyd died took place in that context where Black people time and again don't feel like they matter, and they were standing up and saying, we do matter and we are going to protest and we are going to do something about that. And I think the new Tory bill that's coming in over the police bill is about saying to us they want to stop us protesting. We've got anti-trade union laws, which sadly in the main our trade unions are currently sticking to, that have hampered us, and they want us to have anti-protest laws that hamper us too. And the £10,000 fine I got was paid twice over within a few hours of me getting it, because people want the right to protest. But I'm not going to pay that fine. I'm going to take them to the High Court. And more importantly, I've been on 16 protests since I got that fine in March, because I think the way that you defeat bans on protest is by protesting. The fact that there were protests over Sarah Everard and over the right to protest is why we now have an easier sort of way of protesting, that they were forced to bring back some rights at the end of March. I think we have to show this government that we will not take the cuts that they're making. We will not take them. We will mobilise people wherever. And the key date is the 25th of May, where the anniversary of George Floyd. At work, we'll be taking the knee. People are coming into work, especially who are still working from home, in order to come and take the knee on that day. We need to organise that in workplaces. We need to bring the enthusiasm of the Sarah Everard protest, of the Black Lives Matter, of the climate change, the school students who've made a huge difference to those issues in the last year because they protested, into our workplaces, and we need to get workplaces to begin to react to that too. That's the way we'll begin to fight to change what the Tories want for us and to get rid of this awful barbaric system.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. What a fantastic, brilliant kickoff to our closing rally for Marxism 21 online event. And if you want to follow and keep up to date with the campaigns that the Socialist Workers Party are involved in, then follow us on social media. There's links to our Facebook page, our website, Twitter, and all the rest of it that you can click on in the chat. So massive thanks again, Karen. And we're now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Sarah Evans. Sarah is the branch chair of the DVLA. She's a leading striker involved in the DVLA strike in Wales, and it's great. It's so great to have you here, Sarah. So warm welcome to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Anna. And it is an absolute pleasure to be asked to come and speak at your event today. And what a way to kick it off. Absolutely fantastic, Karen. It was really great hearing from you. Now, over the last 14 months in the DVLA, we've had over 613 positive cases. We've also unfortunately had one death, and we believe that all this could have been avoided. Now, back in March last year, the DVLA worked with PCS to get numbers on site reduced, and we very quickly got from about 4,500 staff down to 400 and cut our services back to key worker services only. Now, the move was welcomed, fully supported by PCS because it was keeping our members safe. Then September came and numbers on site increased massively. We had all the vulnerable staff coming back on site, parents who had been off due to childcare because of the school closures were coming back, and it was also tied into the usual spike of staff on site after the summer leave period. So we were notified on the 7th of September of the first positive case in the agency, and very quickly that first case turned into the 2nd to the 10th, and the numbers just kept increasing. Now, by October, we were meeting with the senior managers of the DVLA and raising our concerns about the numbers. We were told that the numbers on site were fine, staff were to blame for the rise of cases, and we just couldn't accept that. We knew that there was too many people on site, and the only way to stop the cases rising was to reduce that number. By the end of November, the number of positive cases was now in the hundreds. We had members in intensive care because they had become so ill after catching COVID, yet still the DVLA managers would not admit or acknowledge that this was anything to do with them. We were again told that it was the fault of the staff. Now, when we started to see a cluster develop in our contact centre, we were again told it's the fault of the staff. They were typically of a younger age demographic, and as such, we're all going out drinking and we're catching COVID that way, if you were to believe the DVLA managers. We were told that an increase within a couple of weeks was after Beaujolais Day, and that apparently was acceptable. Now, during the first 2 weeks of December, we saw over 60 cases in just a 2-week period, and our contact centre had around 400 staff in at that point. So despite this, we were still being told under no circumstances were the numbers on site going to be reduced because the agency wasn't to blame. Now, it wasn't long before the outbreak was declared on site. Testing all contact centre staff began. Despite this, the DVLA still refused to move and take action. They would not reduce numbers on site, despite us now pleading. They finally took some action 4 days after the outbreak was declared. They decided that they would close the contact centre and the main site building for the 2 weeks in between Christmas and New Year. It was the action that we'd been asking for, but it was too little, too late. So this is when we really had come to the end of the road with the negotiations that we could do at branch level, and we had no choice but to go to PCS at a national level and to get them to intervene with us. We were dealing with an employer who had no interest at all in the safety of its staff, an employer whose leader had been on site 6 times during a 12-month period, yet was telling staff that it was safe. A leader whose attendance on site was questioned by the Transport Select Committee. Throughout all our meetings, at every request to reduce numbers, we were always met with a list of what the DVLA had done to keep staff safe, how they had complied with all recommendations made to them on inspections by environmental health, and how they were a COVID secure building because, you know, they had the banners to prove it, and we all know that those banners would keep us safe. Well, I would put this to you all. How can a COVID secure building see over 600 positive cases? How can a COVID secure building see a member of staff lose their life from this awful virus? And how on earth can a COVID secure building still be seeing positive cases, even when the country was in a lockdown identical to what we saw 12 months ago? Well, the answer to that is they can't. And this is the reason that we were left with no option than to declare us being in dispute with the agency and force to ballot our members. And this ballot was one that the agency were pretty certain we would lose.
1 minute left.
And over the last few years, every ballot that the union has done has failed, and we've never met the threshold. This time around, it was different, and we did. And still, despite that, the agency would not move. So we went to strike. We've now had 2 4-day strikes, which have been incredibly supported. The second lot of action was supported more than the first, which just goes to show that the members on site are still concerned for their safety. So we've done 2 weeks. We're now looking at yet another lot of strike action the week after next. And the money that our members are losing due to the incompetence and hostile managers at the DVLA is just unmanageable. PCS have made the commitment to pay members £40 a day strike pay, and this has just been fantastic. It's meant that our members can keep themselves safe by coming out of work. We've got a fighting fund, which has reached an incredible £38,000 in donations and growing. And if anyone would like to donate to that, then by all means, just drop me a message and we can send you over the information. But I will leave it there now. And as it's been mentioned previously, you know, we are on Facebook, and the solidarity that we get really does inspire our members on. And thank you very much for everyone that has taken the time to send that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was a really powerful contribution, and it's so great to have you here. Solidarity from everyone that's on this call, all over 500 of us here. It's brilliant to hear about your struggle. It's so important that we do, and it's not something that we get to hear about in the mainstream media. So I did want to take this opportunity to mention the Socialist Worker, which is our national paper. That's where you can read about these inspiring struggles, and you can subscribe to that by clicking on one of the links that will be posted into the chat. So massive thanks again, Sarah, for joining us in solidarity. I'm going to move on to our next speaker now. From my neck of the woods, Keir McKechnie. Keir's an elected member of the pro-independence national organisation, Now Scotland, and he's also the chief steward of the pro-independence campaign, all under one banner, and he's a member of the Socialist Workers Party in Glasgow. So welcome, Keir.
Oh, hi, can you hear me okay, Lorna, yeah?
Yep, hear you fine.
Okay, thanks. Solidarity from Glasgow. I'm delighted to be at the Marxism online event. And I want to sort of start by saying that generally, you know, socialist attitude to elections are that they're always secondary to the class struggle, to quote Lenin famously, saying that one strike's more important than a general election. And that remains the case. But however, elections do reveal the different tempo and the political dynamics that are taking place. And I think across the UK election map, there's a very mixed bag. I mean, obviously, we've been discussing this weekend the Tories' victory in England, the fact that they've increased the amount of councils that they control, they've increased the amount of councillors, and the fact that they've won some traditional Labour heartland seats like in the northeast of England. To quote John Curtis, the northeast of England has been painted well and truly blue. This is extremely sort of disappointing, and I think probably when you look at the Hartlepool by-election, it really does sum up the disastrous failure of Labour and Starmer to offer an alternative. And I can't miss the opportunity to say, why is Keir Starmer no resigning for failing to defeat a corrupt, rancid Tory regime during a pandemic that's seen nearly 100,000 people dying? Stop blaming Corbyn. Anybody that watched Mandelson trying to blame Corbyn, you'll realise how desperate the Blairites and the Starmerites are. But in Scotland, the picture's very different. Firstly, if you look at the turnout in the Scottish election, it was something like 63%. That's up 10% in previous elections, which is interesting to show the level of political involvement. The SNP won 64 seats, which is one short of an overall parliamentary majority, but that is quite an extraordinary result given that the SNP have been in office for 19 years now. And the Green Party won 8 seats, and that means that there's now a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament of 8, so there's a clear majority there. And if you look at the share of the vote in Scotland, it's very interesting. The SNP's share of the vote was just under 48% in the constituency vote and 40% in the regional lists up here. The Tory share of the vote is hovering around 22% in the constituencies and in the regional lists. I think shockingly, if you look at Labour's share of the vote, it's 21.5% in the constituencies and just under 18% in the regional lists. That is a disastrous result for Labour in Scotland. And it does reflect the fact that the Labour Party doesn't even support the right of Scottish people to decide the issue of independence in a second referendum, as well as the fact that they oppose independence full stop. And actually, one of the reasons the Tories picked up so many list seats in Scotland is that Labour Party former leaders like Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown are running around in the campaign trail urging Labour voters to tactically vote Tory to defeat the SNP and to defend the union. An absolutely shocking scenario, which is tantamount, I think, to political suicide for the Labour Party in Scotland. But nevertheless, there is quite clearly a huge mood in Scotland for independence and serious anti-Tory opposition. And we don't need to look too far for that to the reason as to why that is the case. If you look at the mishandling of the pandemic, there's, in Scotland, that's been a tragedy as well. The comments about letting the bodies pile up really did sort of accentuate the deep hatred for the Tories. But we also need to sort of recognise that there's been a huge democratic deficit in Scotland for years. In other words, we defeat Tory governments endlessly, and we end up with Tory governments running Scotland. So there's no real recognition of the democratic will of the Scottish people. You combine that with the fact of the impact of Brexit. The Tories are actually pushing for a power grab following Brexit to steal back the limited powers of the Parliament. All of this thing is turbocharging support for independence. I think crucially, millions of people in Scotland see the opportunity that independence can bring to get out of this reactionary, racist, corrupt pro-business and pro-austerity union. That is what's driving support for independence. And we should make no mistake about it. The British ruling class are panicking about losing Scotland big time because they know the stakes are extremely high. They're acutely aware of the ramifications of breaking up Britain and the effects that independence in Scotland could have on Ireland and Wales. And also, I think, importantly, weakening British imperialism's position in the global pecking order of imperialist states. So it's important that we recognise that. But the question I want to address here is, what will it take to win independence and defeat the British state? Because it's also clear that Johnson will not just grant a second referendum. It will require a huge struggle from below. Look at what George Osborne said in the Evening Standard a few weeks ago. He said, why don't we do what we did in Catalonia? Say no, and if they continue to protest, let's just jail them. So we need to realise it's going to require a huge fight from below. And there's two main dangers facing the movement in Scotland at the moment. One is that we wait for years to set the date with a new SNP government kicking NDRF 2 down the road until after the pandemic is over. And secondly, the strategy of relying on the courts and legal manoeuvrings to win the day, this will not happen. And we need to be arguing that the crucial battle needs to take place outside of the Parliament. And there's some key critical next steps that need to be taken. Socialists in Scotland are arguing that we need to mobilise the mass movement onto the streets, with mass demonstrations, an escalating campaign of civil disobedience. I'd be delighted to see thousands of protesters in the coming months outside the gates of Faz Lane saying, let's get rid of Trident. We need to force the Tories to cave in, and that will require mobilising a united movement to force that cave in, but also to pressurise the SNP and the Greens to follow through. And it also means that we need to fight for a radical vision for an independent Scotland. We're not just in favour of replacing the butcher's apron with a saltire, if that means just creating a tartan version of capitalism and neoliberalism. Socialists need to push hard for a strategy based on mass working class action that involves the trade union movement, which is why we're delighted to see the Scottish Trade Union Congress recently vote in favour of holding NDRF 2 and it being Scotland's right to decide. I suppose finally, in an international audience like this, we are very clear that we need the left in Wales, England and Ireland and beyond to support this fight to break up the British state. Johnson's attacks on democracy and attempts to crush resistance to Tory rule across Britain is exactly the same fight as we have in Scotland. We need to unite the climate justice movement, the BLM movement and the independence movement in mobilising and intensifying the fight for independence, which is why we're appealing to the rest of the left to join in this battle to defeat the British state. It does mean in the here and now supporting strikes. It does not mean postponing the struggles for better rights and economic democracy. That's why We are very, very keen to support the strikes that are taking place in Scotland. So we are going to be intensifying the campaign in the coming months. There's a wave of demonstrations that are planned to intensify the breakup of the British state. Please join us and let's get rid of this stinking, rotten union once and for all. And I'll shut up there, Lorna.
Well said, Keir. That was great. Thank you so much. And I'll take the opportunity to advertise this fantastic new book, which Keir's actually one of the co-authors of. Keir wrote the introduction, Breaking Up the British State, Scotland, Independence and Socialism. And you can get this at Bookmarks Socialist Bookshop. The link's been posted into the chat. But of course, as well, I'll say, if you're interested in the topics and ideas that we've discussed throughout the weekend, then do click on the links below for Bookmarks and go exploring. There's a fantastic, very large collection of books covering lots of the subjects that we've been talking about this weekend. So thanks so much again, Keir. I'm going to bring in our next speaker, who is Petros Constantinou. And Petros is a leading member of the Greek anti-racist and anti-fascist organisation Kirfa, and a member of SEC, our sister organisation of the Socialist Workers Party in Greece. And Petros is going to be telling us about the brilliant defeat of Golden Dawn. So looking forward to hearing from you, Petros. Over to you.
Okay, greetings from the Greek anti-fascist, but first I want to refer to the workers' movement. Just on 6th of May last week, it was the day that the trade unions decided to celebrate the May Day, because it coincided with the Christian Orthodox Easter. And so it was a huge victory for the workers' resistance against the neoliberal government, that thousands responded to this call. Thousands demonstrated in the streets, demanding that the neoliberal government of Greece, of Kyriakos Mitsotakis, should not go to the offensive and putting in the target the 8 hour for the workers and the collective bargaining of the trade unions. So it was a huge response, and this was an escalation of workers' resistance going all this period of pandemic. Before of that, it was the doctors' union that they strike and demonstrated. We even succeeded in rehabilitating one doctor who was sacked in a very important cancer hospital in Athens. The president of that trade union was Kostas Katarachias. He was also a socialist, a member of the Socialist Workers Party of SEC in Greece. He was sacked, and it was a big victory that we won, that he went back to his job after an escalation of resistance in hospitals, in strikes, and a big solidarity movement. Before that, we could see artists on the street, we could see the teachers, we could see the young people from the universities resisting neoliberal policies. All this movement was inspired by the great victory of the anti-fascist movement. Last October, on 7th of October, it was the end of the trial of Golden Dawn, lasting 5 years. Golden Dawn was condemned as a criminal organization, and 39 members were sent to prison, including the leader and a lot of members of the old parliamentary group that they built it in 2012. That was an amazing victory of the anti-fascist movement. The campaign lasted a lot of years against the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn. And I want to remember people that Golden Dawn was from 2008 until 2012 in Greece. That was a force of 0.2, of nothing really. And they rocketed in 2012. They got 7%, 500,000 votes, and 21 MPs in the Greek parliament. And they were standing for Hitler politics. They were combining the parliamentary approach with squads on the streets, murdering, attacking the trade unions, attacking migrants, and so on. So they in 2013, they murdered musician Pavlos Fissas, and that was the end of their strategy and tactic of attacking the anti-fascists, the migrants, and so on. Because in 2013, there was a general strike after this murder, and this general strike led to the break of the immunity of Golden Dawn. Golden Dawn had a cover for their actions by the Greek police, the Greek courts, and the Greek state. And it was amazing how far and how deep were these connections. The leader of the parliamentary group, he could speak with the leader of the parliamentary group of the neoliberals in the Greek parliament. That was the acceptance that they had in the immunity. All this broke because of the general strike and the fight on the anti-fascist movement. For us, it was very important that the fight against fascism, it was based on the tradition of Leon Trotsky and the United Front, join forces with the left in the trade unions, unite against the fascists. That was what Leon Trotsky advised the communists and the social democrats. That was the way to stop Hitler of winning authority and leading humanity to the Holocaust and to disaster. He was not listened. Our tradition is the tradition of the United Front. It is a tradition of anti-Nazi League in Britain that SWP helped to build in your country. So for us, it was very important not to underestimate the fascists in that period. And not only to say, okay, and especially in Greece where we had workers' resistance against austerity, to say we have a workers' resistance, it is not necessary to build independently anti-fascist activity. It was very important to build autonomous anti-fascist struggle to stop the Nazis on the street, in the workplaces, and everywhere. And for us, the big lesson is that we based ourselves not only on unity and organizing demonstration to stop them on the street, but also on organized working class activity. The general strikes against fascism, they were very important. One of them I already referred in 2013. The other, it was when the trial started in 2015. And the last one was on 7th of October. We could attracted 100,000 outside the court on 7th of October 2020. That was really very important as a lesson. And the second lesson is that we have to fight racism if we want to stop the fascists. The fascists, they were trying to divide the working class by playing the card of racism and Islamophobia. So for every migrant and refugee that was attacked, the anti-fascist movement was there to organize a demonstration, a local demonstration in the neighborhood, with everybody there, with the socialists, with the trade unionists, with the communities of migrants united. So that was the way that we built this magnificent movement that stopped the neo-Nazis. In 2019, the neo-Nazis were kicked outside from the Greek parliament. So it was before the end of the trial that we isolated them everywhere. And it was possible when we made another very crucial political selection to put the neo-Nazis on trial. And there were many questions in the left, in the movement, why to go and to use this method. It was a very good method to expose to the public and that this was a criminal organization, that they used violence, that they were attacking migrants, they were attacking the trade unions, and so on. So for us, really, this big victory is not the end, because racism is the policy of the European Union. Racism is the way that the fascists, they can come back again. And in Greece, we know very well what is Moria, what is the detention centers, the concentration camps, we call them. Now there are people dying in the detention centers because they don't have access to to health in a period of COVID. And it is very important for revolutionists and socialists to combine the struggle against fascism with the fight against racism. And this is the way to stop fascism rising. In Greece, after the fall of Syriza,
1 minute left.
There were people arguing that after this defeat, the fascists, they will have their chance. They didn't have their chance because of the anti-fascist movement, because socialists are building this kind of united fronts, and it is the only way to leave the space open to the working class resistance, to liberate humanity, to fight against the causes and the roots of racism and fascism, which is capitalism in itself. We can uproot capitalism. We can, and this is the way to put an end to fascism. We say never again. We don't want to see the Holocaust happening again. And the way to victory is to smash the fascists, is to stop racism, and to organize a socialist alternative against them. And I think that the Socialist Workers Party and the organization of international socialist tendency, they are in the first line of this fight, and we have to strengthen these political forces everywhere. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Petros. That was fantastic. Wonderful to hear from you as always. And I'll remind people as well that there's a brilliant interview with Petros in the International Socialist Journal, which you can read online, but you can also subscribe to the journal, and there's a link you can click on that'll be posted in the chat. So thanks very much again, Petros. Going to move on to our next speaker, who's Janet Alder. Janet leads the Justice for Christopher Alder campaign. Janet is Christopher's brother. Christopher was unlawfully killed in 1998, and Janet's led an inspirational fight for justice since then. She's a tireless campaigner for justice, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have her here with us today. So warm welcome to you, Janet.
Hi, thank you for asking me to speak today. It's a year now since the death of George Floyd, and when everybody saw that beam into their living rooms, I think they were shocked. Really shocked that that type of thing in 2020 can happen. But you know, this is something that's been going on for years and years and years. I know families that's been fighting a lot longer than me, 30, 40 years, to get some justice for their loved ones being killed at the hands of the police. But what made it different with George Floyd's death, I think, was the fact that America was on trial. Everybody had seen exactly what had gone on. You know, I mean, your eyes can't deceive you. And I think it raised the tempo with our youth. Our youth got up and got out there, and you know what I mean, and supported, and were really shocked because they really didn't know the ins and outs of, do you know, what actually goes on with these deaths in custody. So what I believe, the reason why that police officer got convicted was pure people power, was the fact that it went further than America. In fact, it went all over the world. Everybody saw that, and there were people out there that probably never even protested in their life, but it woke people up. It made people start asking questions and whatsoever. Time and time again, do you know what I mean, when these deaths happen, and the victims are demonized, same as Christopher's case. They're demonized, they get told, you know, drug dealers, or, you know, or mental illness, or, you know, anything to, you know, for the state to disassociate itself from responsibility. Now, the police cannot get away with these things without all the other institutions being behind them. And I mean like the Crown Prosecution Service. I mean, like, you know, the hospital, you know, time and time again, these institutions back the police, and this is why they're getting away with it. I'm sure many people would have seen the CCTV footage of Christopher dragged into the custody suite, thrown on the floor, gasping for his life for 11 minutes, and just basically left to die. This happens time and time again. one of the first cases that I'd heard about was Blair Peach, when he was actually battered at a protest in the street. Many people had seen it. One would expect, you know, those responsible to be held to account. But the reason they were is because the whole state and the institutions protect the police. And why do they protect the police? They protect the police because they need the police to stand against us when we get up and we revolt, when we're not happy with the situation. So just like, you know, you look at why Boris Johnson has tried to get rid of people's human rights. You look at why Boris Johnson has tried to, you know, bring a bill in, you know, to try and prevent us protesting and whatsoever. Yeah, because they know that it's the people that have the power. And that basically they just want to be able to do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. When I first started campaigning, that's what, 23 years ago, Christopher died. And I couldn't believe that I'd gone out, you know, I'd actually gone to see the police to find out why my brother had died. And I was being followed round Hull. Yeah, they'd set an operation together, you know, where there must have been about 60 police officers involved to, you know, to spy on me 24 hours a day. They were given the authority to spy 24 hours of the day. Now, all I was doing was going to the hotel and going to the courts, you know, to sit at the inquest of, you know, into Christopher's death for 8 weeks. But that authority must have come right from the top. It must have come from the government at the time that allowed this to happen. Now, you know, as you know, we've seen lots and lots of young ones protesting against the bill, with the Kill the Bill. Yeah, these young ones have not been, most of them have never been out protesting before, but they've been awakened. They've been awakened by what's going on. And it's up to us to support these young ones and lead the way. Yeah, not sit back, but lead the way, because they need our guidance. They're very, very brave. You know, you had all the Black Lives Matter out there. They weren't bothered about whether we're going to get COVID or anything. Do you know what I mean? To them, life was too important than to sit back, do you know what I mean, and wait for something, yeah, that might happen or might not happen. They were out there on the streets, do you know what I mean, protesting in every single town and city. There were people protesting in the Orkneys. All over the place, people had got up because they'd seen something that they knew, do you know what I mean, was wrong. And they knew that they needed to stand up. Yeah. And I think, you know, time and time, you've got Dalian Atkinson, the footballer. He was beaten in the street by the police. Yeah. Kicked in the head. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Died. You've got the police up for murder. I mean, the chances of getting the police prosecuted for murder, I think, is very, 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 very slim, especially with a system that I believe is totally corrupt. It's corrupted. Yeah. You know, they do these things to make people believe that something's happening. Yeah. Oh, there's police officer getting prosecuted for murder. You know, they think that we're going to take our eye off the ball. They're moving the goalpost time and time again. Now loved ones, when people have died in police custody and they have an inquest, they're not even getting legal aid. But you've got the police and everybody that's paid out of the public purse. The inequality of arms is unbelievable. But families are getting up and getting out there and fighting. Yeah. I mean, 23 years later, I'm still fighting. I'm fighting now about the way that they treated my brother's body in the mortuary. We thought we buried him in 2000 and they swapped his body for a 77-year-old woman and hid him in 6 body bags for 11 years. Yeah. And once again, they knew all the way along. They knew exactly, and they were using his body for training purposes, trying to play out as if it was the woman of 77. The lady who was 77 came from Nigeria. Her family were all in Nigeria. She only had a friend here. And her friend was looking after her interests, but they kept refusing her a visa. Yeah, refusing the family in Africa a visa for 10 years because they knew it wasn't Grace Kamara in that mortuary. They knew it was Christopher. Yeah. But this is what I'm saying. This type of thing is not going to be stopped without the unity of everybody. Because, I mean, Black people are being disproportionately killed in police custody. The Black women are dying, you know, disproportionately after childbirth. Black people are disproportionately imprisoned. Stop and search. We've got a problem here, but this can't be fought alone. It has to be fought with everybody. Yeah. If I'm just asking, if you see these campaigns going on, join the campaigns. Give the families some support. Give the families some support, because believe you me, without it, the state will just walk over all these people. Now it starts there, and then it starts filtering out to everybody. Yeah, you know, once you start protesting in the street, they're going to want to stop you. Yeah, they're going to want to stop and search you. They're going to want to spy on you. If we allow this to happen, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Thank you.
That was absolutely brilliant, Janet. Really, really, really powerful. And solidarity always. I think so much of what Janet has spoken about, I mean, she said it herself at the start, just really highlights the importance of the events of the last year with Black Lives Matter and the global movement, with the anniversary of the death of George Floyd coming up. So it is just of massive importance that we continue to build the struggle there. And there will be a week of action organised by Stand Up to Racism with the theme of the UK is not innocent. So it's just to encourage people, just as Jeanette did as well, to get involved in that, to find your local Stand Up to Racism group and to take part in the actions that will be taking place in your area. So thank you so much again, Janet, and I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Lewis Nielsen. Lewis is a leading member of the Socialist Workers Party.
Thanks a lot, Lorna, and thanks a lot to Janet. All power to you and the struggle for justice that you've been campaigning on for so long. I want to thank everyone for coming along to Marxism Festival this weekend and all the people who made it happen behind the scenes. I think events like this weekend are very important, because they are about us discussing what kind of society we want to live in. And I think there's a big battle on about what that society will be. As we come out of lockdown in Britain, I think there's a big question about what the world will look like the other side of COVID. And to illustrate that, I want to start with a quote. It's not by Marx or Lenin or Rosa Luxemburg or anyone like that. It's from someone from a slightly different tradition. I want to start by quoting Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen is the Secretary of the Treasury in the United States. And when she came to office earlier this year, she said this to her staff. She said, "We face 4 historical crises. COVID-19 is one, but in addition to the pandemic, we also face a climate crisis, a crisis of systemic racism, and an economic crisis that has been building for 50 years. That is what the ruling class think the future holds post-pandemic. So as we come out of lockdown, we face 4 certainties. We face the certainty that the era of pandemics is just beginning, that the end of COVID-19 is a long way off. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen some of the highest figures for deaths in terms of COVID, some of the highest cases globally. And if you want an illustration of the barbarity of our system, look at the scenes that we've seen in India over the last 2 weeks. The bodies piled high, the crematoriums full, poor people having to leave their relatives in the street to die. And the barbarity of the system means that the big pharma companies, when they see this situation in India, they choose to raise the price of the vaccine. They see it as a profit-making opportunity while thousands are dying every day. And we know that the more that people are left in the global south without a vaccine, unable to afford it, when the big pharma keep patents on the vaccine, we know that it's more likely variants will emerge that threaten the vaccine programs here in the global north. So the era of COVID-19 and the end of the pandemic, I think, is still very much in doubt. So that's the first certainty. The second certainty I think we face is that we know that the climate crisis itself, a cause of coronavirus, rages on. It doesn't just rage on, it gathers pace. 2020 was the hottest year on record. It saw some of the warmest ocean temperatures on record, and it saw some of the biggest instances of extreme weather. And despite all the fanfare in the media about Boris Johnson, about Joe Biden, about Bill Gates saving the planet, we know that what they promised is a drop in the ocean compared to what's necessary, and we know that none of their targets are binding. So all the big promises from the summit 2 weeks ago really mean nothing. They're not even worth the paper that they're written on. The climate crisis will continue to gather pace. So that is the second certainty. The third certainty we face in the world coming out of lockdown is that the economic chaos will continue. The forecast of sluggish growth continues, and whatever the press say about the Tories spending big and so on, we know there's a limit to how much the government can prop up the markets. And we know that the markets will head soon towards more financial woe, and that the lack of government support will mean that unemployment, cuts to services, cuts to benefits, cuts to living standards is what the rest of us will experience. The fourth certainty I think we face is what Janet talked about, the certainty of structural racism. In the last year, one of the big fault lines that COVID has shone a light on has been the question of racism in society. It is a disgrace that the Tories talk about the end of institutional racism with the Sewell report. If you think institutional racism has ended in Britain, listen to Janet's story. Look at Dalian Atkinson. Look at the plans to give the police more powers for stop and search. So we face, I think, a big challenge in society. We face a big battle about what the world will look like. And what this weekend has been about is it's been about discussing the crisis as a whole. It's been about talking about how we can build resistance to it. And it's been about recognizing that all four of those crises are not abstract. They didn't fall from the sky. They don't operate independently. All of them are hardwired into the system we live in. In other words, capitalism, and particularly neoliberal capitalism, is breaking down and leading to a crisis that is political, economic, and biological. So the big question for us, and the big question we've been talking about this weekend, is what are we going to do about it? And what's going to happen politically? Who is going to gain out of the crisis? And it's true that we have seen big gains to the right in recent years. Trump, Bolsonaro being elected in Brazil and the US, they have pushed the boundaries of what is normal for politicians around scapegoating, racism, sexism, bigotry, and so on. And if you think that Joe Biden heralds the end of that pattern, just look at what's happening in France. Marine Le Pen, whose father was a cadre of the supporters of the Nazi regime, someone whose mentor, her father, was an open anti-Semite who called the Holocaust a detail of history. Marine Le Pen, who recently just last week supported a letter signed by French generals calling for a coup to defend French people against hordes of immigrants in French cities. Marine Le Pen might well win the French presidential election next year. And even here in Britain, it's not quite on that scale, but we have a government which, whatever the press want to say about progressive Tories winning elections in the north or whatever, we know that Boris Johnson has adopted, and Priti Patel have adopted, some of the language of the hard right around the scapegoating of migrants, around Islamophobia and more. Now, if that was the only picture, it would be an incredibly bleak one, to be honest. But we also have to remind ourselves that in these crises that have taken place, we've also seen glimpses of what it can look like in terms of advances for the left. Most obviously, we've seen this electorally in the form of Jeremy Corbyn, of Bernie Sanders and others. But more fundamentally, we've seen revolts like the ones that Janet talked about. The Black Lives Matter revolt in America and elsewhere that shook the ruling class to its core, that put the question of racism on the agenda in a way we haven't seen in years. And that revolt was a continuation of a wider pattern of global revolt. Think about the dictators who got toppled in weeks in places like Algeria and Sudan. Think about the revolts in Haiti and the latest one we've seen in Colombia in the last few days. And here in Britain, when you see results like the Hartlepool by-election, sometimes it can feel a bit far away from all of that. But we have to think about as well the revolts and the resistance we've seen here, the anger and the explosions around the police bill earlier this year, the huge fury at the murder of Sarah Everard, and the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, which felt like and gave the opportunity for an anti-racist campaign in every town and city and put the racists, the Islamophobes and the ruling class on the back foot. So the question for us, and I think the question we've been discussing all weekends, is how do we go beyond despair? How do we go further than just settling for the least worst option? It's not about just compromising for someone like Keir Starmer. The question for us is, how do we link those revolts and how do we push them into something more fundamental in terms of challenging the system as a whole? And I think in the last 12 months, there are two key political lessons for us to take forward. I think faced with the scale of the crisis, we have to recognise that if we want a change to match the scale of that crisis, we have to look beyond Parliament as the place to deliver that. It's obvious that we have to look beyond Parliament when someone like Keir Starmer is leading the Labour Party. But to be honest, it was true of Jeremy Corbyn of Bernie Sanders in America. Despite all the optimism, despite the inspirational hope they gave people, those projects have ended up in the dead end of Labour and the Democrats. And therefore, coming out of the pandemic, we have to have a focus on the streets and workplaces, not Parliament. The other thing we have to hold dear in the struggle going forward, and I'll finish with this, Lorna, is that if there is one thing we have learned in the pandemic, it is that the people who really matter in society, the people who are really crucial to the running of society, are not the politicians, not the CEOs, not the big business leaders, but it is the people like Sarah at the DVLA, it is the bus drivers, it is the nurses, the teachers, the porters, the cleaners, the transport staff. It is those people who are the so-called key workers who are crucial to keeping society going. And that means we need a politics to deal with the scale of the crisis that requires using principles, not just standing on the sidelines, but mobilising people into those movements, mobilising people around the anniversary of George Floyd with Stand Up to Racism, for the COP26 climate talks in November, supporting strikes like Sarah's at DVLA's, standing with the Palestinian people in Sheikh Jarrah as they face apartheid regime in Israel. We have to build those movements, but crucially, we have to try and draw them to their most radical conclusions. And I want to finish, Lorna, by saying that I started with the question of the certainties in society. We're certain that capitalism means chaos. What we're uncertain of is about where the next explosions of resistance will be. We're unsure where they will appear, what they will look like, and all the rest of it. Where will the next BLM movement spring from? What we are certain of, though, is that those movements will explode, and the amount of revolutionary socialists who exist in society to build those struggles and pull them to their most radical conclusions will make a huge difference. And I want to finish by saying that the great Irish revolutionary socialist, James Connolly, talked about the only true prophet being those who carve out the future. We need more people to carve out the future to avoid the crisis of capitalism and fight for a better world. And if you agree with that, you should click on the link on the chat and join us. And I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thanks so much, Lewis, and thanks for ending with a Connolly quote. So I'm going to bring in our last and our final speaker. Socialist Workers Party member from South London, Elizabeth Adofu, and she's going to be our final speaker. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Lorna, and thank you all to our speakers. I really want to finish on what sort of Lewis outlined there, because it's clear from his sort of speech and from all the speeches that we have that we quite frankly do have a world to win. And by the title of this meeting, the world we're in is in quite a catastrophe and has been for some time. But I really want to also bring out this message of hope, because when I see a meeting like this and people like you taking time out of your weekend to discuss really important ideas, when I hear the fight back of people like Karen, when I see the strength of people like Jeanette, and when I think about the Pimlico school students who fought racism in a way that I could only dream of when I was their age, at the same time the Searle report came back, it fills me with a great deal of hope. Because I strongly believe with every fibre of my being that we can win change. And to quote, to sort of misquote the great words of Angela Davis, I believe we can change the world, and I can believe we do it every day. And I really do think that we have the collective power to turn this current system right on its head and see uprisings, revolutionary uprisings all across the four corners of the world. And this is not just some socialist wishy-washy sort of feeling. My belief is rooted actually of the changing of the world and our working class history that we all share. Because time and time again, when oppressed, the forgotten, the workers gather together, change has been won. So the big question is, how do we win this change? Now, I'm sure if you ask each and every one of us in this meeting, and there's hundreds of us, that there'll probably be hundreds of different ways that we can do this. And that's okay, actually. We aren't always going to agree on everything and every aspect all the time. In fact, actually, a huge range of ideas and thoughts are often what make movements so great. But I think what we can all really agree on is that we need to do this together in unity. As socialists, we don't just bang on about class unity and black and whites uniting together to fight for just some silly obsession. We say these rumblings because our power lies in our class being united. There's no two ways about it. We have the power to change the world. And that's why the ruling class try at every opportunity to break us up and tear us down. And that's why I'm here today speaking to you as a revolutionary socialist. A tradition of working class struggle that is rooted in revolutionary change, uprooting capitalism and fighting for the freedom of all oppression. It is the tradition of the Russian Revolution, the tradition of the Black Panthers, of the Haitian Revolution, of the 1917 Paris Commune, of the 2010 Arab uprisings, and of last year's Black Lives Matter movements. Movements that see our liberation not being limited in just voting every couple of years or petitioning to governments. Because when you think about the change that we have won and the gains that we have won, they have all been won by radical fight back. Women were simply not handed the vote by men. They organized, resisted, and even died to get the vote. Slavery was not just ended by the likes of William Wilberforce, it was slaves themselves who set themselves free, with revolutions, uprisings, campaigning with white working class people up and down the country. Stonewall was a riot, and it wasn't one that included rainbow marks and spark sandwiches, but rather had Black trans women leading the resistance, fighting against the historical injustice against the LGBT community, fighting the state and the police. You see, we don't need Oxford degrees, parliamentary seats, big donors, years of experience to be revolutionaries. There is a revolutionary leader in all of us. Why? Because all you simply need is the desire to change the world. All you need is hope and anger. But most importantly, you need organization and to be part of a collective. You can't win the change of the world on your own. And quite frankly, you shouldn't have to. We have a world to win, but we can only win it when we are united. So I'd really encourage you, if anything you've heard today and over the last couple of days has really touched you, then join the resistance, take that leap if you haven't yet. Don't wait any longer to do it, and join the Socialist Workers Party. And to everybody else, I look forward to continuing the struggles and fighting for this new world that we can absolutely win. So solidarity to everyone here.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really, what a fantastic end to an incredible closing rally. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And thank you to all of our brilliant speakers. We've certainly ended our Marxism 21 online festival with a bang. A really powerful finish to what's been a brilliant weekend. So thanks so much to everyone of our speakers, to everyone for attending today and taking part throughout the weekend in the discussions. And just to echo what Elizabeth said, this weekend's been hosted by the Socialist Workers Party, and if you want to join us, then the information there to join, the link is on that holding page. That's going to stay up for a few wee minutes more. So yeah, massive thanks to everyone again. Cheers.